They're like matching, sort of. Exactly. Oh, yeah. Like your face goes to like.
So it looks like we're having a little trouble with the camera,
Right?
so,
It's always.
but it is recording, so it's just about to.
It's so recorded.
Yeah, record.
Good evening, everybody. We're going to call the meeting to order as of 5:33 on January the 28th, 2025.
Right, so Ms. Berger? Here. Ms. Crawford? Here. Ms. Heller? Here. Mr. Hodgeberg?
Here.
Mr. Mentz?
Here.
Ms. Stark? Here. Mr. Thomas?
Here.
All present.
Next item on the agenda is to approve the meeting minutes from our first meeting. Do you have a motion for that? Any discussion?
Second.
Motion by Joey Thomas and second by Amy Berger. All in favor?
No, Nancy.
I'm sorry, Nancy.
All right, Mr. Thomas? We're going through, and so if you approve the minutes, you say yes. If you think
Oh,
they're.
yes,
Yep.
yes.
Ms. Crawford? Yes. Ms. Berger? Yes. Ms. Heller? Mr. Hodgeberg?
Yes.
Mr. Mentz?
Yes.
And Ms. Stark?
Yes.
7 yeas, motion's passed.
Next item on the list is public comment. There appears to be no comments needed today, so. Number 4 is review of the work plan, and we're going to turn that over to Miss Rebecca.
I had pelted you with a lot of materials. So one of them was the single sheet work plan. And I'll confess, as I was looking at things, was it easier to go lockstep up through the charter or bounce around? And the more I thought about it, I thought maybe going lockstep through the articles one by one would be the best approach and least confusing to all of us. So you see how I have it laid out. The only caveat is the February. Yeah, it should have been.
We just got the agenda and PowerPoint slide and Article 1 and Article 2.
It was, I had a whole bunch of attachments, was it not?
I sent them all.
Okay.
We've received 5 attachments.
Well, that's very interesting. Anyway, we adhered in this work plan, which I will make sure you get copies of, to what we discussed in terms of 2 meetings a month. The meeting that seems to be a bit problematic is the February 25th meeting, which law director and I will both not be available. And so a thought would be to maybe take a break and then pick back up.
I'm also not available that day, so that works for me.
Well, that ends that. And I'm sorry, this should have been in there. So it's wrong now anyway, so we'll fix it and just push things back. I think that being said, if you have your charters there, we're going to start again marching up through the charter, starting with Article 1. And for historic reasons, I wanted you to see some of the memos that we prepared when the charter was originally being considered, to see some of the choices that were made and some examples from some other communities that would illustrate various ways to proceed. I don't know that anybody, Mr. Chair, I don't know if anybody really has any comments on the name or the boundaries. I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
The only question I have on that, actually, in Article 1, Section 1, under the name, is it still references the village of Sunbury. Does that need to maintain, because the finishing line says when it transitions to city, so we're still good?
That's one of the things we'll need to talk about. Some charters, once they've been enacted and gotten to this point, will strip out the transitional stuff. And if that's, Caitlin, I don't know if we want to have a motion to that effect as we go along, have someone make a motion second, and then have some discussion about that might be appropriate.
Is there any disadvantages to making that adjustment, or is it better to leave it as it is today? Like, let
We'll
that,
clean things up.
right? Anybody want to make a motion to remove the village language?
So moved.
So Nancy is going to make a motion to remove the village,
A second.
and a second by Amy.
All right, Ms. Crawford?
Yes.
Ms. Berger?
Yes.
Yes. Heller?
Yes.
Mr. Hochberg?
Yes.
Mr. Rentz?
Yes.
Ms. Stark?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
7 yeas, motion passes.
Anything else on the name?
Sidebar comment. That was totally the right thing to do. You're revising it. It'd be confusing to say we're the village until we transition to city. We're the city now.
Yeah.
It was also nice to have that without gnashing of teeth, because we had that, there were longtime people in here when we were going to become a city. Do we have to become city of Sunbury? Can't we stay village? No. All good. You made the right decision there, but we are a city now.
So any reference to the word village will be stricken and replaced with city.
And there are transitional provisions at the back of the charter that speak very similarly about when we become and so forth and so on, that'll strip out. So nothing else on number 1. Boundaries. I just eavesdropped on a nice conversation Mr. Bream had about annexation. This is just very general. And maybe you want to elaborate on the city's current policy in that regard.
Well, sure. And question before the meeting, and I think it was a good one, had to do with, how do annexations work? How do we approve those? What is the, what's required to annex property? Is it just a simple majority? Is it more than a simple majority? There's an example of another charter that had a 60% requirement for annexations. The most common misconception that I find when it comes to annexation is, well, first of all, let me preface it by saying annexation is controversial because you're taking ground from the township and you're annexing it into the city. Now, that's become less controversial since 2001 when the annexation laws were amended, because the ground stays in the township for their base tax purposes. They still get their base taxes in the township. Right? The misconception is that we go out, Sunbury is actively going out and annexing property. Like we're this octopus and we've got people out there and it's like we're Ohio State recruiting players, right? That's not happening. You know, the property owner petitions for annexation to Sunbury and to the county commissioners. And we just react to that petition. So they're asking to come in. It's never us demanding they come in or requesting them to come in. At least it hasn't been historically. And usually that's because the property owner wants to develop their property and they want municipal services. They want sewer, or they want our zoning, or they want our police protection, or all of that. Right. But it's the property owner saying with their property that they owned and they paid for, I want to come into Sunbury. It's not us going out and taking ground from the township of our own volition. So our procedure is once properties annexed, the boundaries of Sunbury change. And you can see that if you get on the auditor's website, what we've annexed over the past 20 years, 25 years, and we've annexed a bit. I'm not going to minimize what we've done, but at the same token, there was recently a thing with Westerville and Harlem Township where they were going to just throw all of Harlem Township into Columbus because it was going to get annexed otherwise. And I'm scratching my head saying, we've been annexing for 20 years and it's only been this much, these properties. It's not as though we've taken a whole township. We've taken some ground. I mean, not taken, we've annexed ground at property owner's request, but it just seemed unusual that they would just give their whole township to Columbus versus letting the normal process, run its course. Anyway, I don't know if there's any questions about that, but generally speaking, we have our boundaries, but when annex, the boundaries are changed. Best example of that, and you can get on the auditor's website. If you get on the layers of the toolbar, it'll show you governments, and you can click on governments under layers, and it'll show you all the municipal governments, and that'll highlight all the Sunbury stuff. Yes.
Mr. Bremer, are there ever instances though where the city is proactive in engaging property owners where it fits in sort of into a city strategy per se of where our boundaries should be based on maybe what the goals of the city are? That might be 10 or 20 years out, but is it always a reactive process or are there ever a proactive process reaching out to different property owners?
I think there are proactive processes involved. When we zone properties, we have a master plan that shows what our zoning is for properties outside of municipal boundaries. Best case in point is the freeway area. And we said what we want to do out in that area. Really, we don't have to be prospecting at that point, the developers do. There are developers out there and they're looking for properties that has development potential. And usually they're, properties that have municipal access for annexation or things that they focus on.
Maybe working in cooperation with ODOT based on maybe whatever the roadway needs are, or like the parkway. I don't know exactly how that process played out with, where the parkway is proposed to be going and property owners and.
Great discussion.
Yeah.
We need about 2 beers and a half an hour. But,
I'm getting into a hypothetical, but.
There was a lot of identification involved in that. During that process, there was a north route and a south route. We ended up with the south route. It actually was found to resolve 17 times the traffic problems than the north route. But there was a high push for the north route. There were some very influential property owners on the north side. But because of that, there was an annexation of the route on the south by a developer into Sunbury in anticipation of the Sunbury Parkway project. And that's been a decade. Yeah. That does happen.
Okay. Any further comments or questions on the boundary issue? The real meat of tonight's meeting is the form of government, and I asked Caitlin to put up on the screen. I don't know if everybody can see it. I sent you this PowerPoint that had a lot of information just generally about charters, but I wanted to zero in on the form of government because that is going to drive a lot of our discussion when we get to Articles 5 and 6. The thing I would stress to you truly is the line at the bottom in bold. This is a continuum. You are writing, if you will, the Sunbury Constitution, and you have freedom to blur the lines. That being said, you see the typical types of municipal charter government that we have in Ohio. And if you could advance. Slide. Strong mayor is one type. And that, it's kind of interesting geographically, that you see in very large cities like Columbus. You also, that tends to be, we were talking about Chardon earlier, a more of a north and northeastern Ohio kind of orientation. You have an elected mayor, and the elected mayor much runs the show. And doesn't have to go to council to get approval on department heads, can veto council legislation, and really is running the show. And I'm no value judgments here. I'm not saying good or bad. It's just a form of government predominantly found in large cities where they run on a partisan basis, and predominantly more in the northern part of the state. Weak mayor. And this is really a lot like the statutory form. And I won't name names, but I worked for a very long time for a municipality that had weak mayor. And when the auditor and the mayor weren't talking to each other, it was difficult. And when the law director, they kept trying to pull him into their spats, it was difficult. But it's an option. And you see how the lines are kind of blurred, but when you have those independently elected folk, there's not always consensus. Next one. Council manager. That is, and if you have that memorandum number 1, there were a lot of different samples of council manager. Council manager is predominant in southwestern Ohio. For those of you that took your Ohio history, you might remember that Dayton had a devastating flood back in the early part of the last century. And the elected type of situation with people not agreeing and whatnot, it was tragedy. And they were the first large city in Ohio to have a council manager form. So because that was in the southwestern part of the state, you find a lot of council manager cities in that part of Ohio. Also in central Ohio, we have quite a few, and they were listed in the memo in Article 1, quite a few municipalities that have council manager. This is viewed by some as a more professional type of orientation. You've got the manager, if you will, somewhat running the show, but of course the manager serves at the pleasure of council. And the manager appoints those department heads, and again, we can blur the lines and involve council and approval, or to make certain appointments like police chief. However, Sunbury chooses to do it. The manager is not part of the legislative body and is not, like in the strong mayor form, doesn't have any veto power over council legislation. Next one. This is what you have currently. And I'm, again, no value judgments. It's not good or bad, but was a good transition, I think it's fair to say, from what the village had to what Sunbury had at the get-go for charter form of government. It is one that is yet another hybrid with powers being divided up. The thing that can be challenging, and this is something to think about, if you remember your charge 5 years out is to kind of look how are things working and so forth. Unless council would choose otherwise, this charter is not going to be looked at again for another decade. So it is fair to think about what's Sunbury going to look like 10 years from now. And does this approach look like it's going to work? If the city grows, you may not, I was joking about this the other day, you may not always be blessed with somebody like Mr. St. John who can devote the time that he does to being there. You may need a different kind of arrangement. And my job isn't to, sway you one way or the other, but to point out you should be thinking on a 10-year mindset, not today, but 10 years from now. What's this community going to look like, and what need will it have for a particular form of government for the city? So with that, I sent you the memos. You can see some sample language. I don't want to put you on the spot, but did you have some thoughts you wanted to share?
Please.
Good evening again. Thank you. I think Ms. Prince-Horn teed this up very nicely. The type of government is, like what's on the outside of the packaging, right? But it's really when you get into the articles and the powers and the terms that you'll ultimately determine or recommend to determine any changes to the particular charter. This may surprise you, but I think I need to give you my personal perspective since I've been mayor for the past 4 years. It is extremely challenging to be full-time employed, which the charter permits, and also be the head of council and the head of the Planning and Zoning Commission and leading the police department in the fastest growing city in Central Ohio. So it is extremely challenging. I think Ms. Prince-Horn teed it up nicely. And I'm not patting myself on the back for this. I will do whatever it takes. But my recommendation, as it was in the first time I met with you, is take the people out of it. Take Joe St. John, Daryl Hennessy, Law Director Breen out of the picture, and think about best case scenario. And perhaps more importantly, think of worst case scenario. You'll get into this more in Articles 5 and 6, and really Articles 3, Council, right?
Council's the next one.
But I think you want to think of this. We've all heard stories on the news of municipalities gone wrong, or elected officials that are out of control, or city administrators that are out of control. But you have to think, how do you mitigate the risk? And one way I can say that is very difficult to fire a mayor. It is not as difficult to fire a city manager or a city administrator. Just to be frank, if you were to at least track towards the council manager form of government, no matter whose powers lie where and whose terms lie where and those types of things, if you have a chief administrative officer, the city manager, and council on, whatever percentages of votes, if you just say it's a simple majority, has the ability to remove the city manager. It is a very, it weighs heavy on me that the police department report directly to me. I mean, it's an honor. But on the other hand, we had 2 massive tragedies last year. We had a swatting event and we had a murder. 2 years ago, we had collective bargaining, where you're dealing with, completely negotiating a union contract for the next multiple years. It's your largest budget. If I can be really practical, I think budgeting is probably the single strongest reason I would recommend to go to a council manager form of government. Because despite Daryl and myself and council working very closely with one another, that may not always be the case. And anytime that you have two distinct organizations, think like police department, the largest budget in the city, and all other city functions, engineering, legal, parks, streets, wastewater, everything else. It's a hard argument to make to say, let's objectively look at these together, unless it's under one umbrella. And the council will still have what they call the purse strings. That's what council's true job is to legislate. For the legislative body, they're also, their primary function is to control the finances. But if I could make one recommendation, just as your initial fork in the road, I would take an open mind to changing the form of government that we currently have in place. And to back up to Ms. Prince-Horn's earlier comment, the form of government that we have now is great. It was a great transition from the former statutory village form of government. It was a logical step. What I'm recommending is the next logical step, knowing that by default, this won't be revisited for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Yes. Is there precedent? Are there other examples of municipalities that operate that way that you look toward, and maybe they are a few years ahead of us, larger municipalities?
Yeah, I mean, the two that I would say,
And you don't have to name them specifically. I was just curious if there was.
I'll name two that almost every suburb in the city of Columbus is a council manager form of government. Delaware. Here's the two that I wrap my mind around, and they're slightly different, but they're pretty close. Dublin and New Albany. New Albany actually passed their charter amendment the exact same election that we did. They had already been a charter form of government, but I think they were mayor, council administrator, and now they are a council manager form. So, and I was actually reading through New Albany's. It's not that much different than ours, other than it's saying that all city personnel report up to the city manager. That's different with our charter.
If
I'm gonna grab them well.
you have, I don't know if you had printed out or have access to the historic memo on Article 1, the council manager communities in our region: Powell, Delaware, Dublin, Hilliard, Marysville, Westerville, Worthington, and Upper Arlington.
Yeah, I was trying to think of how to word it. If before we ever decide on that, would there ever be something where you could see you as the mayor still working well if some of the powers change in the next reviews? I take it we're going to review like the third and fourth and fifth areas, not today, but I just want to make sure we explore all options.
Maybe I don't
Like-
understand the question.
If we change some of the powers of the mayor, do you think that would change anything before we consider changing?
I think I know where
council?
she's going. He's not advocating for doing away with our mayor. He's just saying exactly what you're saying. We need to look at the powers. We need to look at who reports to who. Right now, the umbrella of a mayor, which it grew, it descended from being a statutory village. You know, when I started, Sunbury was 3,000 people. We're pushing 10 and we're growing like this. And what Joe has to do is drastically different than what Len Weatherby had to do 28 years ago. Drastically different. So having the police department report to Len when it was 2 guys or 5 guys, 1 shift, you know, not much going on. We weren't annexing anything, you know, Miller's Farm, everything Kroger was cornfield. You know, there was no Sunbury Estates, there was no Sunbury Mills. was none of it. It was what was behind Wendy's that was our one subdivision. And what was, over at the Gardens on 37, that was it. And that started, that was built in the 70s. So there just wasn't, now we are dealing with so much when it comes to these developers, development agreements, annexations. Again, the police department is very active. They've got a lot on their plate. So I think what you're seeing is your elected mayor saying it's a lot for me, and Joe's very high functioning. Tommy Hatfield had a lot on his plate. He dedicated a lot of hours to it. He was in a similar position. It's graduated way beyond what it was even when Tommy was here. So it's just a question of how are we going to find the replacement for him whenever he decides he is done. And there's a burnout factor too. You have a good person, they've got a full-time job, they're working at Huntington or wherever, and then they've got to come and they've got to somehow fit 25, 30 hours a weekend of Sunbury stuff. It's just, it's at what he's saying is it's at a critical point, and I couldn't agree with him more. Again, it was fine. And I think, the statutory form villages where you have a mayor, you had a 6-person council, and the main changes we made when we graduated, because people were here, and even 5 years ago, I don't know what our population was 5 years ago. We were just coming up to 5,000. Now we're at what, 9? 8 something, right? And some change. So literally in 5 years, that's 3,000 people. I don't know what that number is. Is that 40% growth? I don't know what that is. But when we were here before, everybody said, I like Sunbury. It's operating so well. We like the mayor. Everybody's doing, and that hasn't changed. To Joe's point, it hasn't changed. It's not as though it's completely broken, but there are definite pressure points now that are really starting to reveal themselves. And 10 years from now, if that same 40% growth comes by and we're 20,000 people, you're going to have a very tough time finding anybody that's going to be able to do what he does and do it effectively. And if it's in today's world, if it ends up just being the wrong person, he asked you to think worst case, and I'm just going to say what he didn't say. What if a person runs for mayor they have an axe to grind about something in Sunbury? And it's a hot button political issue and they get it. Then what? They're not really there to spend the time to do what all has been done, but they've got the police force, they've got all these things. That's what is a cause for concern. As we grow, probably you need to have somebody who controls it all, and you need a mayor. He's not saying you don't need a mayor, but it becomes, what are his powers? What's under him? So it's exactly right. As we get into these next articles, that's where we're really going to look at. Where do we need to shuffle the deck? Where are the checks and balances going to be? How are we going to Joe's point, discussion with Daryl earlier today. Daryl says, I can be fired for anything. So it's not as though I can do a bad job and make council upset and just continue, right? There's a check and balance for him. With a mayor, it's completely different. He's elected.
I have a question about the process. We're not expected to make this determination tonight. I realize that each article covers different topics, but it just seems like we have a lot to learn and discuss before we decide what we're doing works or we should change it. Is that, am I?
Absolutely right.
Okay.
We've got to get this done by July, right? But no, as far as a definite timeline, we're focusing on these first 2 articles, which are mostly introductory. We need to do some cleanup on, language, what we are, we're a city, we're a village. Eventually, we got to come back to the one line that says, what's our form of government? Going into that, though, this is just, this is what you need to be thinking about as we move into the meat of it. What are the powers of the mayor? What are the powers of the council, the legislative body? What are the powers of the administrator? Are we continue to call it an administrator? Or are we going to move to what most cities have, which is a manager, which is probably preferred? Those type of things. This is just setting the plate for it. Yeah.
There real quick, if I can, this is the charter. That's all of it. When we did it the first time, we had a 3-inch binder of multiple sections and this is what this city does, this is what this city does. Now, all these samples from everywhere, all throughout Ohio, we've pared it down to this from a 3-inch binder. None of us here are legal professionals except for those 2 seats. They're bringing us the information. We're going to make our best guess of how we want Sunbury to continue to be. It's been great. How do we keep it moving forward greatly? There's going to have to be change. It's called Kaizen. There's more people, there's more stuff. Something has to change. It can't be the same Sunbury. It's not going to be. We can't go backwards. So we just have to keep it on trajectory to keep it as awesome as it has been and to make it good for our kids.
Good point, Randy. And what we did the last time, which I'm envisioning us doing this time is, you know, we had these articles. It was harder because we were starting completely from scratch, but now we've got something. I envision us as we move forward to these articles to give you, number one, the staff recommended changes, you know, things that just need cleaned up, but also things that you can think about and we can have discussion about. And then you'll have that prior to the meeting so we can come in and focus in on what we need to talk about.
And one of the reasons I want to give you that historic information, I want you to see what the first group was looking at and the different language options that there will be. And what we will end up with by the time we get through the work plan is a red line to the existing charter. And then you will have to vote on that. We'll be kind of voting as we go along, but then overall, you will submit that to council. And then council has the opportunity to forward it on to the voters or make changes or both. Does that make sense?
Can you further explain how, because it's a bit ambiguous to me, but how New Albany is, their charter states that they are a mayor council administrator, but effectively they operate as a council manager form of government?
Actually, that information is basically, you know, it's not only in the.
Okay.
They've moved to,
Oh, okay.
So
You did mention, yeah.
the city of Sunbury passed, they passed theirs, they went from what you just said.
Yeah.
To a council meeting format. And they're going to do it by January 1st.
And was Mayor Spalding mayor while that transition happened, or?
I don't know, but probably.
Okay. Yeah.
If we do change, how long does Joe get to, or Mayor St. John get to stay mayor? If it ever changed?
We'll give them 24 hours.
I was curious, like,
He's
does
elected
it
for a
just
term.
happen?
What you do will not affect the fact that he's our elected mayor through the balance of his term.
Okay.
Recommendations that will still need to go to council.
Because like,
it goes to council
Was
and
it
it goes
ready
to
to-
the voters.
To vote, yes.
it makes me feel better.
There's still gonna be elections. There's still gonna be a mayor. It's just what is the mayor responsible to do?
We're just distributing
they-
roles and responsibilities across a
He won't be
greater.
responsible for the
I
action.
just wanted to consider worst case scenario if we no longer,
I don't think he's going anywhere.
okay.
Just back up. You may remember, I think like a Boston cereal, whatever it says on the outside, which is like legally, whatever you call this. This is much less important than what you're talking about, the powers, so we can get into those. So you can put a placeholder in tonight and say, yeah, we're gonna go to council manager. To me, on record, it does not matter nearly as much as getting into the powers and things like you mentioned, like a chairman will continue through even if there's an adoption of this charter. And I mean, all that language is in there for the last time, like the people who are in office now transition into their new role when term expired. Two other things I just wanted to mention, I promise I'll sit down. If I can boil it down to why I'm recommending this, it's two things. One, it is to mitigate the city's risk long-term against a polar mayor on one way or another that will directionally change how Sunbury looks and feels. And no matter, think of like police department, defund the police, think of authoritarian state. I mean, that's what your mayor as the chief executive officer of the police department has the authority to make the public feel. Okay, and the other one, Mr. Green said it, is I truly think you limit the potential quality candidates long-term as the city grows. If you say, we're not gonna pay you enough to make this your job. You have to have another job for independent development. And you have to lead the largest budgeted item in the city and do them both at 100% effort. If you have a family, that's multiplied by a bunch.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we can reserve additional discussion for when we get to the powers sections. If that's okay, and we'll just kind of plug council manager in there for now and go from there if that's acceptable.
Yes.
Then Article 2. It's going to get a little esoteric, but the first 3 sections are to make sure somebody can take advantage of everything it can take advantage of under the Ohio Constitution, reserving all powers of local self-government to itself. So it says that in 3 sections, but that's basically what it is. The cooperative authority really has been amplified by a change in law. After the Great Recession, we saw a new section of the code sneakily tucked, if sneakily is a word, into the miscellaneous provisions, 9.482, which basically says the same thing. And it was in the era of shared services, you saw a lot emanating from the state, encouraging local governments to work together and not get all hung up in doing so. And this basically mirrors that provision. And I don't know that there's, I'm looking at you, there's been any issue in that regard. Sunbury's always worked collaboratively with the other entities.
Yeah, we're right in the process of, what we already did reinstitute. We're now getting some cooperative agreements together for another shot at a joint rec district where we've, this time solicited willing participants, willing partners. And we've got a couple. So we have cooperative agreements right now with Delaware County. We have cooperative agreements, BSTNG, we're part of that fire district.
All the law enforcement agencies,
Yeah.
Monroe County, Delaware County.
Mutual aid agreements. In fact, we just passed that, or maybe it's the 3rd reading tomorrow night. So yes, we're quick to provide help, and we're also quick to accept help where it's needed and available. And that's the way government should.
Any questions about any of these sections in Article 2?
We also have a joint venture agreement with the schools. We just did an
You do?
economic development agreement with the schools. Yeah.
That covered multiple school districts or just
big one.
just people?
And TACC.
Oh, you're right.
And, yeah, the Career Center. Okay. Well, this may be one of our shorter meetings, but I do want to give you a preview of the coming attractions, Articles 3 and 4. We're going to be delving into council, and there are a number of technical corrections that city staff has forwarded to me, none of which are particularly controversial, but just cleaning up some things. So we have a lot of that. And I don't know if there's anything particular in that regard you wanted to add.
No.
Technical cleanup. It's when we get into Articles 5 and 6 that we're going to be spending some time. And so what I'd like to do for you, I'll get a redo of the work plan. So you can take February 25th off your calendar, and we'll just push out the 2 weeks. And we had indicated already that March 25th was not going to be a meeting because that's Big Walnut spring break. So we'll get you a new one of that. And then an agenda, I'll get you the historic memos and a list of the technical changes that have already been suggested.
I'll go ahead on everybody's calendar. I'll get the February 25th taken off, just so you guys don't have to worry about that as well. But
can I ask, is there a roster of the members
I can get you one. I have one that I pull from, but I'll make sure to get one over to you as well with names and email addresses.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
Any other questions of me or of,
Can we get like a
City
boilerplate of a charter for a manager?
well, these memos have excerpts, but we can get you a whole charter. Which ones would you like?
Just one, like a boilerplate, just to see what the differences is from
Okay,
a manager.
okay. Yeah, that would be nice since it was contemporaneous.
They're all public records.
Oh, okay. I can just look it up then. Never mind.
Oh, okay.
I think, I mean, yeah.
He said he was gonna look it up.
It was attached.
You show where the
It
examples were. I can
identifies
just look
which
it
ones
up.
there are, so they're all public records. We can just look them up.
As a question, as we're looking to places like New Albany that have transitioned, especially recently, I think it might be helpful to, pick your brain or whoever has the most close contact with them to see what maybe they would have done differently. Just to see what kind of problems that they encountered that they wish, hey, if we just wrote a couple lines a little differently or distributed power a little bit differently. That's just a thought that comes to mind, just so we can try to learn from other people's mistakes.
I work with the mayor from New Albany on a variety of matters. I can contact him.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, right. I forgot. I'm sorry. You mentioned the technical corrections in Articles 3 and Articles 4. If we change from our form of government from what we have now to the council manager, those technical corrections need to be changed again, or should we pause that?
Probably not. They're more in line. Alignment of council terms. Provide for appointment of an alternate clerk of council. We'll be moving back and forth once we get to 5 and 6 to this. Another is committees having the terms end with the calendar year, adjusting appointments so they're staggered for the Planning and Zoning Commission. Board of Zoning Appeals duties, the comment was that legislative matters is too broad. So there's a lot of that kind of thing that doesn't affect.
Understood. Thank you.
But there will be some things that will. Duties of council versus if you have a manager, you might be splitting that up. But you're free to write on your own slate and set it up however you think best.
Are we going to review section 5 first? Then, no, okay, I just wanted to.
Is there a reason we would do 5 before 3?
5 is about the mayor.
Specific to the mayor.
5 and 6 should be done kind of together.
This is your ball game from a legal perspective. We'll do it in the order that you suggest.
Pardon? No.
Is there an order that we should do this in?
Well, I thought about mixing it up, but then I thought, it might be nice to get through these technical corrections and all of that, and then get into what's going to be 5 and 6 are the real meat of the discussion. And we may even decide we'll do 5 and then do 6 at a subsequent meeting. I just laid this out for starters. You're
The
your
big
boss.
for the charter itself, I think, is we need to do our own homework and review and analysis on the forms of the government, because once you pick that form, you're going to be guided down the path naturally. And then we can, dig to the weeds and red line and pen and mark it up and change it. And maybe we don't want 7, maybe we want 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever,
Could that be our next meeting?
Could be.
Digging more so that way we move into the correct direction. I don't want to say any of us are swayed one way or another, but I don't want to have to go back and review items just in case other things change, which I don't know how much they change going one way or another, but
I thought about going from 1 and 2 to 5. I thought about that, so it's your show. We can go do it wherever you want.
Do we do like a vote? Like or does anyone have any thoughts?
I think 3 is council and 4 is legislative procedure. I think you're gonna find very little you need to modify based upon the discussions tonight about moving from council administrator to council, or from mayor administrator council to more of a council manager form. I just don't think there's that much overlap. When you get into the subsequent articles, that's where you're gonna get into that, is where you're talking about the mayor, you're talking about the administrator, which would transition to.
I like to work on difficult things first, or things that need deeper thought, just to get through the hard parts.
Good choice.
But that's just a preference of myself.
There's 13 articles. We had 9 meetings and we canceled 2. So,
Mhm.
aside from that, I can't be more direct. Like we know we have to get through, we just have to get through it.
Mhm.
So if the next meeting, if we can go through 3 and 4, because those should be relatively rubber stampable, and then attack 5, and then we can proceed with the next meeting with 6, because we know that those are thicker.
It might be a good baseline for you to know what council does, which doesn't require a lot of change.
Mhm.
Where you get into, okay, how does the mayor and how does the manager interact with council and each other?
Mm.
You know, maybe build the foundation first with that and then move up.
I like that recommendation.
You said, don't worry about the packaging right now. Let's just work on what's inside. That's a good point.
Beauty is we have a working document, so we don't have to destroy it and do it from the ground up. We can manipulate what we want.
Yeah.
So just improve what needs to be improved.
Certainly what was discussed earlier tonight is exactly that. This is not a tear down rebuild.
Mhm.
This is some
Fine tune.
pointed revisions based upon growth. What we have is not broken, but for future growth, it needs tweaked.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't get overwhelmed with spending a bunch of time reading Dublin's charter and New Albany's charter. You can dig it out when we get to 3, when we get to 4 and 5, and you really want to dig in, you're going to get decent at this in reviewing these, and you'll be able to find the provisions. Say, okay, what does theirs say? And we should be able to give you where we get with the language, where we arrive at the language that staff and the mayor had referenced tonight that we want you to consider. Then we're going to point that out to you and potentially give you examples of that. At least that's what we did it last time. That's what I'm envisioning. So you're not just wandering off on your own trying to figure it out. That'd be tough.
Discussion?
No.
Motion to adjourn the meeting at 6:24.
So moved.
The roll.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Ms. Crawford, Ms. Berger,
Yes.
Ms. Heller,
Yes.
Mr. Hochberg,
Yes.
Mr. Benz,
Yes.
Ms. Stark.
Yes.
7 yeas, we are adjourned.
That's